Coming up on 60 Minutes.
This is romance scam times a million.
Exposing the scammers.
They are brainwashing techniques.
Latest devious tricks.
You can't believe your eyes.
It's like a live deepfake.
Yep.
How AI is earning them billions.
We haven't seen anything like this in the world before.
As more victims get stung
I just knew in that moment I'd been done.
from these secret scam factories. Pretty heinous and calculated.
Absolutely. But they know what they're doing.
Hello and welcome to Extra Minutes, the 60 Minutes podcast. I'm Adam Hegarty, and if you don't know what pig butchering is, it's about scamming, and you catch that story on our YouTube channel, as well as 9 Now. Now, the brains behind that story, of course, is our producer, Laura Sparkes, who joins me to my left. Good to see you in front of the camera, Laura.
Yes, it's been a while.
Has it been? How long?
10 years.
Oh, wow. Gee. Again, we went with you to Thailand to look at this, but like all stories, it began with a victim, and that victim was Sarah.
Yes.
Sort of came to us like any real scam story, didn't she?
Yeah. I mean, we've heard of these victims before. I think Sarah was a great example, though, and you would agree, I'm sure, that she was really upset with what had happened to her, and she was angry that she'd gotten sucked in.
Yeah, it was really dawning on her as we spoke to her too, right? When you sit down these victims and actually spell out their story at length, you can see the cogs turning in their brain. But a big part of this story, obviously, Laura, is there are two sets of victims, the scammed and the scammers, and that is what took us to Thailand to follow their journey when they're trafficked there, flown into Bangkok and then driven up to the border. And we did that drive. Well, what struck you about that?
How long it was.
Yeah, exactly.
As you know, 7 hours. The scenery was the same pretty much the whole time until we got up into the mountains there. As you said in your piece to camera, I kept on thinking about what would be going through the minds of these people who think they're going to Bangkok for a job and then they're heading away from Bangkok and into the countryside. And, I mean, we got into Mae Sot, and as you know, it's a really different vibe up there.
It came out of nowhere, didn't it? I mean, like 7 and 8 hours you mentioned, like rice paddies and farms dotted along there. You feel like you're in the middle of nowhere, and then suddenly just this huge, huge town, not the size of Bangkok, but it struck me. There's just buildings everywhere and really built up, and probably for good reason.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, it was a kilometre away from the river border with Myanmar. And what got me was the amount of Chinese influence there. Or not Thai influence, Chinese influence.
Yeah, Chinese restaurants top that list. It was really obvious.
Yeah, and we know that they are involved in those scam factories. So there are gangsters from China involved in those scam factories.
Yeah, and we went and had a look at those scam factories. What got me is, I thought we were going to look at maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 compounds, and then Michelle, who's one of the NGOs we dealt with for this story, she suddenly said there are about 60 to 70 of them over a 70-kilometre stretch. I mean, they're not really what I expected. They look like big dormitories.
Yeah, and I mean, that was interesting because I thought we'd go to a couple and we'd have to drive extended distances to get to them. But we were at those scam factories within minutes each time. And we only saw 5 or 6. There's, 60 along that river. So,
and you can see the people there too. It's not like there's these big guard towers and big walls with wire fences or barbed wire fences. Like you can see them on the balconies. And these are people who are in prison, but it just looked like they're just living there like their everyday lives.
Yeah, and I noticed that when we were there looking at those people, I'm thinking, wow, they're stuck. They don't know. They don't want to be there. And they're forced to scam people like you and I. And it's hard to comprehend, I think, just how terrible and tragic it all is, and there it is right in front of us.
And it's not just us seeing it too. It's Thai police on that side, and there's border guard force on the other side. And then remember when we saw that barge with all the cars just on it? They're not hiding. It's just clearly allowed to happen there so easily, smuggling people back and forth.
Yeah, and that was illegal, as Michelle told us. The cars, that transfer of cars across the river was illegal, as is the transfer of the workers.
Yeah, and they can be there really briefly we caught up with CD, who we call him in the story. That call came out of nowhere. I remember we were in an interview, weren't we? And then suddenly you turn to me and you say, there's someone who's escaped already. We've got to go find him.
That's right. Well, we weren't even in an interview. We were filming outside.
Exactly.
And we had
right.
nowhere to do the interview. And as you know, at 60 Minutes, it's really important to have a great big space.
Yeah.
So I'm madly talking to the hotel room, the hotel, can we get this room? And then we shoved poor old Mark and Chick in there to set up. And you and I take the driver to go and pick up CD at the airport where he's about to fly out.
Yep, I think you ran in to try and find him, and I kid you not, I just walked up to the other entrance and there he is just with his one backpack and I think his hockey stick. Didn't he have a hockey stick?
Yeah.
He's just in a singlet and appears there, and you know what? I expected someone who maybe didn't have very good English, but this was a 30-year-old, I say young, a 30-year-old smart guy who spoke perfect English. And it was that moment that I realised, these aren't silly people. They're smart people who get tricked as well into ending up in these scam factories.
Yeah, extremely educated. And it's not like he'd just grown up in South Africa and this was his first job. I mean, the man had worked in Germany for years. So that was quite incredible when we met him, and at the time we didn't know whether he wanted to be identified. Remember, and he just didn't stop talking.
Yeah, I didn't get a word in.
He was high on the fact that he'd escaped. He'd saved his life. I think he said that to you at some point.
He did.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah, a whirlwind for him, no doubt.
Yeah.
And again, similar to Sarah, like I mentioned when we sat down with her, when it started dawning on her, like you say, he was rapidly speaking in the interview when we sat him down, and then I think it was dawning on him there as well, where he looked down a couple of times, and I think he just started realising what he'd been in. That was just a week. There are other people who've been in there for months, sometimes years. He gave a real insight. It was fascinating.
Well, let's remember he'd literally been dropped after his family paid the money.
Yeah.
He'd been dropped in Mae Sot the night before, and then he was at the airport. And I mean, it's incredible, really. I think. He was very, very lucky. And I think the fact that he spoke perfect English really helped him.
Yes, it's like they noticed that he was smart.
Yeah.
Didn't they? That, if this guy wants to pay, we better get rid of him because he's going to cause us trouble. That's the impression I saw.
I think so. I think so. And he has caused them a bit of trouble by speaking to us, and good on him. Like, he's a brave man.
Well, that's it. This sort of requires people to speak out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, the attention gets put on these the leaders of these crime factories and scam factories. But we went there for a reason. That sort of came out of nowhere. But, we were thinking the only impact or introduction to the scammers who get trafficked was when we actually had that stakeout. That stakeout did happen. It was a long one. You've probably been on a few in your time, but that was up there with the longest. How long were we sitting in that car park for?
I think we got to the car park at about 3 or so, and then it all went down about 8 p.m. Yeah. But remember, the call came through just after the interview, and it was 11 in the morning. So those men came out of that cab, or that taxi, at past 8 o'clock at night. Yeah. And it was kind of weird, wasn't it? We were stuck in
It was.
I mean, we felt like we were almost stuck in a Westfield car park. It wasn't Westfield.
It kind of was. I mean, people just going about their day,
Yeah.
going to the shopping centre, but then suddenly this is the sort of focus of a big operation and an important one to try and get these people to safety.
Well, it was surreal because, everyone's just walking around, but in the meantime, we've got these walkie-talkies. We're talking with Judah and Amy in the other car about these men escaping a scam factory with a smuggler, getting illegally taken across the river in a boat. And we're just sitting there going, well, this would have been good to film, but
exactly
unfortunately we couldn't do that.
It was dangerous.
Too dangerous.
Way, obviously, isn't it? But what got me, as the hours kept passing, it just dawned on me that, Amy, Judah, who work with Michelle, I was in the car with Michelle, that they have had no contact really with anyone brokering this release. So the two men who got out that dealt with someone on the Myanmar side who's paid the ransom to the compound. So they'd worked there for a little while, and then they got out, and then they were waiting for a smuggler to get them across. But it's 50 metres wide, that river. Wouldn't take long. The compounds are just next to the river, and then it was about 15 minutes, the Thai side to where we were at the car park, but suddenly it takes 8 hours. I was there thinking, this is surely not going to eventuate.
Yeah.
But were you thinking that at all? I didn't think it was going to happen.
I didn't think it was going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, as you know, we went there with the hope that we would actually be able to witness that. And perhaps it wasn't as dramatic as I thought it might be, but it was horrifying when we finally saw those two men walking with Judah and Amy back to the car, and they were struggling, as you say in the story.
Absolutely, yeah. Got bruised and battered, and electric shocks, and cattle prods basically used on them when they refused to scan. They were just hobbling, weren't they? That's the first thing I noticed. They could barely walk.
Yeah, and we didn't know exactly what had happened to them until the next day, and that's when we saw the photographs, and obviously we were hoping to speak with them, but when Judah and Amy and Michelle showed us those photographs, they had to go to hospital. I mean, that was a terrible abuse, terrible physical, violent abuse, which we can't really understand here in Australia, but we need to, and we need to know that this is happening. This is happening to them, and this is happening on the other side to people here like Sarah.
I really don't think many people know. I mean, anyone I speak to about this story, no one realised that the scammers are this. Not only do they not want to do it, but they're prisoners. Do you think many people really?
No. And I mean, when you say trafficked, they're trafficked. You think of sexual trafficking, and this is a different trafficking. It's equally as bad. It's just different. Human trafficking from one country to another, forced to take the life savings of someone else across the other side of the world, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Australia.
Yeah. And the physical toll, obviously, as well. But what struck me was that the mental toll on those two men who Michelle, Amy and Judah helped save. And I remember walking up when we were trying to, as you say, speak to them in that hotel room. The first thing we were told is just they're not ready. They are not with it. They were really, as you see in the story, because we had a camera set up, they were really open with the information they gave about what happened to them. But I think what Amy and Judah were thinking is, they're just sort of venting now. But when it's now starting to dawn on them, they're still in a really, really bad way.
And when you look at the bruises on in the photographs that we were given, those bruises weren't new. Yeah. So that was bruising upon bruising upon bruising. They'd been basically tortured for 10 to 15 days, I think they said, in the car. So and that's because they wanted to get out, and that's the message, isn't it? If you want to get out, this is what happens to you. You're going to get bashed. And that's why they do it in front of people as well.
Yeah, and it's hard for law enforcement to stop this, so I guess the best thing anyone can do, whether it's an NGO or 60 Minutes, is try and shed a light on it, which hopefully we do in this story.
Well, and the other thing is, we interviewed Director Gam, the head of human trafficking in Thailand, and remember what he told you. Unfortunately, we couldn't get it into the story, but what did he tell you?
Well, exactly right. The best thing they can do is try to make their life difficult. And as we said before about Mae Sot, one of the reasons why it's so built up is these people with a lot of money, these criminals, live in Mae Sot. So there's not much in Myanmar except these compounds. So they actually live in that side. And if they ban them, put red notices on them and ban them from that side, suddenly they're actually doing something. That actually shocked me, Laura. I thought I'd go into that interview and go, there's really nothing you can do, can you? Direct again, these are people who are above the law. But he was adamant. They're doing stuff now, which is great to hear.
Yeah, I mean, because their own people are being trafficked. Thai nationals are being trafficked into those scam factories. So Thailand has to do something about it. And if they're not going there, they're going to some of the scam factories elsewhere.
Absolutely.
It's a huge problem. And as Aaron West from the United States says, this is going to decimate the middle classes of America, the United Kingdom, Australia. It's going to decimate their life savings because they can get to anyone. And for some reason, we're believing them. Yeah. Well, we know why we're believing them, because when you ask for a video call, they put a digital avatar over their face, as we see in the story.
Yeah. What did the Melbourne technology expert we spoke to, Liam, what did he say? Is that you can't trust your eyes anymore, so you just have to listen to your head, and it's probably a good message to end on, isn't it?
It really is.
Absolutely. Well, Laura Sparkes, thank you. Good to chat to you on this side of the camera.
Yes,
it's a bit of a
strange. Thank
Absolutely.
You. Thanks, Adam.
Good stuff. And to remind everyone to catch that story on not just our YouTube channel, but also 9Now.